And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Elise from Australian Space Agency.
Hello, everybody. I'm just waiting for my slideshow. But as mentioned, my name is Elise. I'm from the Australian Space Agency. Might have already talked to a few of you at our booth today. And you might have a bit of an idea about what you think I might do from hearing that I work at the Space Agency. Some people might already know from conversations with me, but you might be thinking that I have a background in IT. Maybe I'm an astrophysicist. Maybe I'm training to be an astronaut. And that's a lot of, common thoughts when you think about the Space Agency. You assume that it's one of those things. Maybe I excelled at science at school, did maths at university, but I'm hoping to change a few of those preconceived notions throughout my presentation. So to start that off, I've got some really nice embarrassing pictures of me at school, so please enjoy those. So when I went to school in the UK, as you can probably tell from my accent, which is a bit different to here, but for this presentation, it's pretty similar. So I dropped all of my science and maths topics as soon as I could, which is year 9 in the UK. And I ended up doing further study in photography, English literature, and English language. So very different areas to where I now work. And I did that because I just didn't think that I was any good at science and maths. I thought, I don't know if I really want to be doing that for the rest of my life. To be honest, I didn't find it super engaging the way that my school taught it. It was a lot of out of a textbook. And I really enjoyed the more creative side of things. I really liked reading, analyzing texts, and I love photography. So I took those further, and I also did a bit of psychology. And I finished my schooling with my A-levels in those subjects, and I enjoyed studying them. And I did quite well. I was quite happy with my results because I ended up doing something that I enjoyed. So the natural progression for me from that point was, okay, great, I'm going to go to university now. What do I study? I had no idea. I knew I kind of liked English, so I was like, great, I will just study English. But as it started to come up to me starting university, I was considering whether this was the right choice for me. I just wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to do right now. I'd spent most of my life at this point studying, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to then launch myself into what was a 4-year degree of something that really I wasn't too sure about. So I withdrew my application before I started, and instead booked a ticket to fly to Australia for my gap year. Spoiler alert, I never went back, as you can tell by the fact that I'm stood on this stage now. So I came to Australia on my gap year, and it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made. I got to do some awesome experiences, again, some really flattering photo of me up at the top there. So I traveled all around New Zealand, did skydiving, bungee jumping, whitewater rafting. I got to do some really, really amazing experiences. I also got a picture of the first time that I went to a planetarium. And if this shows you nothing, it shows take nice pictures of yourself, because one day you might have to stand up in front of an audience of people at school and show them some really great pictures of yourself. And that was the first time I'd ever really thought of space. Never thought of it before. And I watched, it was a show on the Dome that was actually by Rupert Grint from Harry Potter. He was talking about space stuff, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then I left and never thought about it again. But after that, so I did quite a lot of, traveling, going around Australia, thinking about what I want to do with my life. And so then I got to, okay, maybe I want to start studying again now. I thought about doing a trade, and I just didn't think that was really for me. Same with an apprenticeship, so I started thinking about university again. And I was like, great, well, I considered doing English quite a long time ago. Maybe I should do that. Well, it turns out you can't do an English degree in Australia alone. You have to do it with something else. So psychology, I kind of enjoyed that. I'll just enroll in a psychology degree minoring in English. And I did that for a year, and I enjoyed it a little bit, thought it was quite good, very interesting. But I found out that if I wanted to be a psychologist, I would have had to have done a PhD. And I just wasn't sure that I enjoyed it enough to want to do this for 7 years. So I went back to the drawing board. And one thing that I would do after I would finish a long day at uni studying is I'd go home and I'd watch a lot of this guy. I'm sure we've all seen David Attenborough before. So I'd go home, and to relax, I would watch his shows. Specifically, anything deep sea related is what I really, really liked. So I was thinking, if I'm studying this and spending a lot of money and a lot of time doing something, but then going home and to relax doing something completely different, maybe that isn't the thing for me. So I looked up marine biology. Turns out my university had a marine biology course, and then I thought, oh no, I've really got to consider this now. And so I enrolled in marine biology. I wasn't quite ready to give up my English yet, so I also did a degree in English and creative writing. Now, this I actually did see through to the end, and I absolutely loved studying marine biology. It took me to some pretty amazing places. So this is a place that I got to go. I lived in South Africa for over a month in national parks there, and some of the people that you see there now are some of my closest friends that I made while I was over there. What we did during this trip as part of my degree is look at a lot of animals. Did a lot of animal transects, which means counting animals. I did bird ringing, where you capture birds and you put rings on their ankles and then set them off into the wild again so you can monitor their numbers. And it was an amazing experience. I got back from South Africa and then pretty quickly went to the Maldives. Now, the Maldives is somewhere that we think of as pretty exotic and beautiful, and you see the houses and on the sticks in the ocean, and it's a very expensive area where I guess a lot of rich people go on holiday. My experience was not that. So I went to a little remote island there, and one of the things that I saw the most during my time there is this, which is dead coral. So I took this picture after snorkeling for over an hour, and that is all I saw the entire time. So that was pretty shocking. Another shocking thing that I found out while I was on this trip is this is what the beaches look like. So you see the Instagram models on the beaches, and they've got their hut in the background. This is what it actually looks like in the Maldives. I actually saw a little boat pull up on an island, and they moved all of the rubbish to the side so they could then take a picture looking like they were on this really beautiful beach, and then they left all the rubbish there. And it was quite shocking to me to see how we're, I guess, changing what is actually happening in the world rather than communicating about it. This was another shocking thing, is that one of the only ways that they can actually manage the amount of rubbish that they have there is to burn it all, which I think we know is not the best option, creates a lot of harmful gases, but it's the only option that they have to deal with all of this rubbish that they have. They don't have recycling there. So that was all really shocking to me. And I went home and thought, oh my gosh, how did I think I was going to this beautiful, island, and then this is what I saw? I need to do something and communicate about this in some way. So I thought about my skill sets. So I have my science, my marine biology side, and I have my English and creative writing side. And there's a little crossover there, and that's called science communication. Now, everyone here would know of a science communicator, whether that's what you call them or not. I don't know if any of these people are familiar. Hank Green's pretty popular on TikTok at the moment. You've probably seen the video of him explaining what happens to wax when a candle is burnt. So all of these people take pretty complex scientific concepts and they communicate them in a way that, one, everyone can understand, no matter what your background is, but two, is interesting. And that's the key point, because I don't know about you, but I don't like to go home in my free time and read scientific papers. Even if it's from an area that I'm interested in and enjoy, it is so dry. I would read scientific papers that were specifically about the research that I was doing and would not understand a lot of it, because they just write them in a way that's quite inaccessible. So that's why people like this exist, to bridge that gap between what is happening in science and for people to learn about that. So I thought, maybe this is what I want to do. So I started volunteering a lot. I volunteered as a writer for the Australian Marine Science Association's bulletin, where I would write about new news that was coming up in a way that was interesting. I started doing a lot of art about different species and other things because I just thought that was interesting. And I ended up co-writing a book on wildlife research in Australia about how to work specifically with cephalopods. And that led me to where I am now. And you may be thinking that's a pretty big leap from talking about marine research to working in space. But the key thing is that I had the skills. I didn't need to know about planets and about engineering. I needed the communication skills, which is what they were looking for. So the job that I applied for is not the role that I'm in now. I applied for a job as a space communicator. And what that means is that I would talk to people like you, anybody in the general public, about different space concepts and be able to describe them in a way that we can all understand. Now, when I applied for this job, I thought there's no way that I am going to be successful. But again, I was, because I knew how to communicate these concepts, even if I didn't know them when I first applied for the job. I have learned a lot about space in the last few years. And that brings me to the space agency and where I am now. But you can't really talk about the space agency without talking about Australia's history in space. Because although a lot of us might not realize, we actually have a really long and proud history in space. So we were one of the first countries to launch a satellite with our launch of RESAT in 1967. Has anybody seen the movie The Dish? Yeah? Oh, a few people, not as many as I would think. If you've seen the movie The Dish, then you would already know about the roles that Parkes and Honeysuckle Creek have played in broadcasting the moon landings. And we've also been involved in quite a lot of research and things with NASA and other space agencies, which is very exciting. So that brings me to the purpose of the Australian Space Agency. And that is to transform and grow a globally respected Australian space industry that lifts the broader economy, inspires and improves the lives of Australians, underpinned by strong national and international engagement. And that's a lot of words, but the point that I wanted to make with this is that word just there, which is inspires. And that's where my team and I come in. So what we want to do is communicate that, one, space exists, because people don't realize that that is an industry that you can work in, and that, two, it's more than just astronauts. Astronauts are amazing, and I am going to go a bit off topic for a second and talk about the fact that we've just announced the first Australian astronaut in history at the Australian Space Agency, who is my colleague Catherine Bennell-Pegg, which is extremely exciting. But there is more to space than just astronauts. Now, I won't spend too much time on this bit, but there's a place called the Discovery Centre in Adelaide in South Australia, which is the public face of the Australian Space Agency. And I won't talk about it because it's in Adelaide and not here, which isn't super helpful for all of you, but that is where I do a lot of my work. And one thing that there is this place, which is Australia's first ever publicly viewable mission control room. And why this is particularly exciting in Sydney is that Sabre Astronautics, who host this, also have a base here in Sydney. They're expanding quite a lot, so they have a lot of jobs in this area, which is very exciting. Working in space situational awareness, which basically means making sure that satellites aren't hitting each other, as well as a load of other areas and space weather. One thing we talk about a lot at the Discovery Centre and at the agency are space careers. I normally have a challenge that I like to do, which is any interest that you have, any job that you can think of, will relate to space in some way. Normally I get the chance to talk to them, to all of you afterwards at the booth. Because this is going to be the last presentation, I will give you the challenge to relate your interest to space yourself and to try and make that connection. And through my work, we've got to inspire some awesome people to take space careers. So as long as none of them try to take over the galaxy, I think we've probably done a good job there. And I've talked a bit about space careers. One thing that I'll leave you with is this. Now, this is something that one of my colleagues made, and it is not at all an extensive list of all the space careers that ever exist, but it's a pretty good idea of how varied space careers can be. I like to think of it a little bit like a movie. So if you think of a movie, you have the main actor, who everyone talks about, you know, the new movies coming out with Chris Hemsworth, but there's all of the people behind that make that movie possible. You need researchers, you need set designers, all of those to make that movie a success, and that's the same with space. Now I can hear we've got a bit of talking, so that means that you probably have some questions about some of the things that are on here. I have about 5 minutes left, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Oh my gosh. Just over there. Yep. Game design. So if you're thinking about going to space, you want to train an astronaut, one of the ways that we do that is using VR to create how I guess you would experience going out into space to create the same habitat using VR. There's something on the NASA website called it's something like Experienced Exoplanets, and they use artists to reconstruct exoplanets from what we can understand those planets looking like without ever seeing this exoplanet, by the way. Just from maybe seeing it wobble and being able to do a lot of very intricate maths that I don't understand, to be able to work out what its surface would look like, what color it would be, whether it has water. And game design and artistry is used to recreate what we expect that looks like. So there's a lot of crossover between game design. Yes? To space? So the question was, what inspired me to change from marine biology to space? It's not a super crazy answer. There's jobs in space. There was one job in Adelaide at the time when I was going for roles in marine science. I happened to get it, which was really great. But if I wanted to move further, I would have probably had to do a PhD, which I talked about before. I just don't think that that's for me. And I really enjoy this role, so that's why I moved in. I may go back to marine biology, but yeah, thank you. Just here.
Space agency in the next 20 years?
Where do I see the space agency in the next 20 years? So the goal of the space agency is to grow the industry in Australia. So we want to create 30,000 jobs by 2030, which is closer than 20 years. But we're really focused on growing how space affects our day-to-day life on Earth. So where space agencies like NASA, who have been around for a lot longer, a lot more established, are looking at more exploration, we're really focused on creating things to help life on Earth. So whether that's Earth observation satellites to help fight bushfires, I would expect us to continue to progress in that area. Towards the back, yes. Why are we so far behind? So the space agency is only about 6 years old. So that is probably why. We actually have had a lot of involvement in space even before we had a space agency. It just hasn't been a huge focus for our country up until recently. But we are still we have a lot of skills in this area, even though we haven't had a space agency. So if you think about communications, automation, we've got quite a big mining sector, so we have a lot of skills in these areas. I wouldn't say we're behind. I would just say that our space agency is younger. I think I have time for maybe one more question. We'll go just at the front here. What technologies do I use in the workplace? So I think that question probably isn't best for me, but for the space industry as a whole, there's a lot of coding involved. With a lot of engineering, that takes a lot of coding. I am not, as you can probably tell, I don't use a lot of technology in my areas, but with robotics and automation, R&D, there's a lot of tech that is used in those areas. As outreach, I don't use them that much. Do I have time for one more? I have time for one more. You've got 2 hands up. Sorry. So that was that I use communications as part of my job, but what other skills are also important? Being personable, having skills to work in a team. I know you do a lot of team exercises at school and you're like, oh, this is so annoying, but being able to work with lots of different people is honestly one of the best skills that you can have, because everything is in a team nowadays. And I did have more, but I think my time is up, so that's probably the answer that I've finished there. Thank you so much for your questions. Sorry I couldn't answer them all.
Thank you, Elise. And now for our final speaker of the day, we will have Valessa Basic from the Australian Signals Directorate